Thanks for coming in this morning. I always think morning sessions are a bit challenging, especially Monday mornings, so bear with me. I'm going to go for about 35, 40 minutes. I'm going to try to stick by the podium. As you know, we're recording video and audio today, so I'm normally a wanderer, but I'll try to stay right here so everything can be picked up. Just a quick question. How many of you supervise people? Just a show of hands? Yeah, that's what I thought. How many people don't supervise people? Anybody? Just a few, okay. So this may not apply to 3 or 4 or 5 of you, but if you end up supervising someone, this will become very relevant very quickly. So we're going to talk about documentation, discipline, termination, some of those kinds of things. But as part of this, I'd like to also talk about just managing people, because in the end, if you manage people right, you will hardly ever have to document discipline. You'll hardly have to administer discipline, and you'll hardly ever have to fire people. Granted, we all have bad hires. Has anybody ever had a bad hire? Oh, look at all the smiles I see in our eyes. Yes, so that'll come up, but you'll definitely minimize it if you manage people properly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that topic and blend it in here as well. So let me start on this topic. Who are the easy people to manage? Can you just yell out characteristics, traits? When you think of the people that you managed that were just, you didn't have to do a single thing. What were some of the words that come to mind to describe those people? Women. Women. Okay, that's fair.
This is the age.
Yeah. Yeah. Who wants to say men?
Well, this was a fun one.
Yeah. What do you think of traits, characteristics, people? Initiative? Accountable? Self-motivated, I heard. What was that one? Self-starter. Dependable. Yep. What else? Think of the people that you just love to manage. You didn't have to hardly do a thing. Honest.
Easygoing.
Easygoing. What else? Homeschooled? Punctual. Not even close. Punctual, yes. Yep. Well, these are some of the things that I had listed on my list too, and you named some of them as well. These traits, these characteristics of these really solid people seem to go uniformly. If you took your top 5 performers and you looked at the traits and characteristics, you would probably list this almost the same list for all 5 people. And they're really easy to manage because you don't have to do anything. I had a staff at RCU of, at one time, 15 people. I never had to administer discipline to any of them in 23 years of employment. Never. And here is the director of HR giving all kinds of supervisors advice about how to handle discipline, how to conduct it, how to write it down, and I never had a staff member who had to go through it. Why did that happen? Because we hired the right people. So we'll talk about that. What makes people this way? What gives them these characteristics and traits? Well, it's really about where they came from. You find them, right? You screen them, you do the background checks, you hire them, you do the interviewing, and you have no control over where they were before they came to you. Everything that happened in their lives influenced them before they got to you. How many people have children between ages 18 and 30? Just a sign of hands. Can you change their value system right now if you wanted to? If you disagree, can you influence them in any way, shape, or form? No, it's all set. In fact, some studies would say that their value systems and the way they act in the workplace are started to create by age 14 to 16. So they're going to college or right out of high school, and they've already formed their values of how they're going to work in the workplace. And now you're going to find them 10, 20, 30 years later, and you have to shape how they interact in the workplace based on values that were created when they were a kid or in school. Also, there's environmental factors, things like socioeconomics, how well off they were growing up as a child in their home. All the experiences they had before they came to you, the past work experiences, the past supervisors they had, the past coworkers they lived through, the organizations, the way they got treated. That's all out of your control. So the hard news of my session today is that you can't control much of what comes to you. So as I said, we're going to talk just a little bit about hiring in this discipline session because you have to have recruiting efforts that bring candidates in that you're looking for. How many people here hire individuals? Show of hands. Yep, so probably if you're supervising, you're probably also hiring. And then how many people of those, when you hire somebody, the very first thing you do is make a list of traits and characteristics you're looking for in a person? Just a show of hands. The very first thing you do. 1, Two. Two out of about 50. Why don't we do that? When we're hiring somebody, why don't we sit down and say, what am I looking for? What are the traits and characteristics of this person I want to hire? The person you hired in this position 10 years ago, and now you have turnover and you're hiring it again, do you think the traits and characteristics might be different this time than they were 10 years ago? Absolutely, because the team has probably changed, the environment has changed, the culture has changed, the organization might have changed, the owners might have changed. So you need to write down traits and characteristics when you hire people, and then look for those in your interviews. So you have to do interviews well, you have to know the characteristics you're looking for, and use multiple people in your interviews. Don't rely just on one person, because when you're looking for traits and characteristics, you need multiple people to hear what's being said and watch the body language and ask the follow-up questions in interviews in order to find out these traits and characteristics. But even if you do interviewing right, we have this bell curve problem. Everybody remember school? Bell curves, kind of random distribution. So what happens? We've got this bell curve of employees, right, in your organization, and you have a certain percentage. They're in the middle, about 60, 65%. You have about 5 or 10 or 15% on either side of the curve. And the problem is we spend almost all of our time as supervisors dealing with people on the left-hand side of the curve, which would be the underperforming employees, and very little time with the high-achieving performers over on the right-hand side of the curve. So that's the problem. Jack Welch from GE, famous for saying, every year we lop off a certain percentage of bad performers, and we just keep doing that year after year after year, and after a while we have a high-performing organization because we don't have any more bad performers, we have average performers and high performers. So you always want to concentrate, of course, on getting the bad performers out of the organization or changing their behaviors. And I'm here to tell you that more often than not, it's hard to change the behaviors of bad performers, and you almost have to be prepared to let them go. So managing people, we're going to go a couple of managerial rules before we get to the documentation issue. Communicate thoroughly and often. Do not spend any time, don't waste your time doing things that don't give direct communication to people. So if you have something to say and if you're making observations of people's performance, the worst thing you can do is talk to other people about it or sit in your office and stew about it and write notes. You just have to have conversation with people. You also have to give people updates about the organization. You want to have people stay informed of what's happening. There's a phrase called open book management. It basically means tell people in your company what's going on. Tell them how you're doing financially. Tell them how your growth is for the years. Tell them what's happened to your customer base. Keep them updated with their organization. Performance feedback. There's just a great big conference somewhere in the United States, I forget where, HR people from some of the biggest corporations in the world got together, and you know what they talked about? Does anybody read this article? Yeah. It was real recently. No more performance reviews. Stop doing performance reviews. That was their message. And why is that? Because 95% of supervisors hate doing them, and 90-some% of employees hate getting them. So all we're doing, we're setting up a process by which everybody just struggles through the process. Now we know why we do them, because we document performance, and we'll talk about documentation just a bit here. But the idea of this communicating frequently, and here's an example. My son works for an IT company in Eau Claire. They have 47 employees. The owner has never conducted a performance review in his life, and the supervisors have never conducted a performance review in that company. And why is that? They get performance feedback to their employees constantly. Weekly, 5-minute, here's how things are gearing, here's how your projects are going, here's what I'd like you to get a little bit better in. And so they never need to write a performance review because the employee always knows how things are going. So that's the idea about frequent communication. And ask people for their input. People are desperate to give ideas to how they can help your company. Some more rules: make work exciting and challenging. And I know some jobs are very routine and very mundane. The more you can rotate tasks and change things for people, it will be easier to manage them and you won't have to do discipline. Get consensus from people. How many people here hold department meetings or staff meetings? Just a sign of hands when you gather people together and have chats and conversations? Okay, so I'm counting 5 in the audience. Department meetings are extremely important because people want to feel part of a team. They want to feel connected. They want to feel like they have value to the team. It's a basic human nature in psychology. And so take the opportunity to get people together as small groups and say, how are things going in our department? What ideas do you have? And get their, and then use their input to make decisions. Coaching and teaching, you have to give people performance feedback all the time. Like I said, this example of my son, It's really important to recognize people for all the good things that they're doing. It's so easy to point out the things that people are flawed in and to jump and react and have a negative reaction to what people have done. But you have to recognize people for the positives. We'll talk about this frequency issue, but when something disappointing happens, can I have you ask you to write this down? Would you write down emotional barometer? I'm going to give you a little visual image. Every one of us as a human being, especially as a supervisor, has an emotional barometer. An emotional barometer is that thing inside you when something really amazing happens from one of your staff members and when something really disappointing and frustrating happens from one of your staff members. And you feel it. You feel that rush. It's either an adrenaline rush because you're really excited because someone did something amazing, or it's like really disappointed and really frustrated and really angry. So if you can measure when your emotional barometer is rising and falling, when it starts rising out of anger and frustration and disappointment, that tells you it's time to go talk to the person, and don't just write it down, but go have a conversation with them. I guess you can read the rest of those. Performance reviews. If you want to avoid discipline and documentation, if you do performance reviews, and if you are writing or saying something that the employee is looking at you like, what? I never knew you felt that way. I never heard you say that before. You failed in the performance feedback mechanism and process, because people should not be surprised at a performance review. The old traditional annual performance review is a summary of what's happened for the year. It's just a document, and every comment and everything that's written in the form should have been communicated to employees somewhere during the year. So if you find yourself writing and conducting and they're surprised something went amiss and you didn't do something properly. Also, this praise people. Most people like to be praised in public, never disciplined in public. It's so easy to lose your emotion and lose your control, and something bad happens, like on a shop floor, for example, and just blow up. How many people have ever seen managers blow up in a work environment? Show of hands? Yeah. Right? Because it's just so frustrating. And so it happens right there in front of everybody, and it creates a very sour mood, and you lose productivity and you lose efficiency. So praise people in public and always discipline in private. And I say most people like to be praised in public. I have heard numerous stories where people have, an owner of a company say, okay, here we are at our annual meeting for staff. We're going to recognize Joe. Joe, why don't you come up? I want to have you stand right here, and I'm going to tell everybody how great of a job you did. And Joe's going, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. I hate being in front of people. So if you ever do that, check in with a person before you just call them up, because not everybody likes to be recognized in front of people. Other issues, just things like wages. If you're not in control of what the wages are in your organization, and if you feel like they're low in the marketplace, say something. Go talk to your HR folks, go talk to your owner, and try to get some changes made. Treat people the way you want to be treated. It's that golden rule. And again, don't show your negative emotions. As a good leader, you don't show your negative emotions to your staff. You show them individually to people behind a closed door, but you don't show them as a whole. And another one is, if you're frustrated with someone, go talk to your boss. You need to vent. You need to have somebody to go have a chat with, but don't go talk to your coworkers, your peers, or the other employees. Uh-oh, I pushed the wrong button. There we go. All right, now we'll talk about performance deficiencies. So, as I said, performance deficiencies need to be addressed. You have to tackle them as soon as they happen. We're going to talk about administering discipline. We're going to talk about creating performance improvement plans. And then at the end, we'll talk about these other 4 issues that come up in job performance. So let's address performance deficiencies. Here's some questions to ask yourself. If you're sitting down, writing down what happened, what I'm going to say to the person, how I'm going to say it, when I'm going to say it, what are the disappointments? What's frustrated you? What were your expectations compared to what they actually did or said? When you write down your notes, can they be read by anybody else? I mean, I don't mean just in terms of legibility, but I mean understandability. If you write your notes for yourself, and if you're going to store those documents, show them to at least one other supervisor or to your manager so somebody else can understand what it was you're communicating in case that document comes into court. When's the last time you ever said anything to an employee about this? Is it the first time it's ever come up, or is this a brand new situation? How many people have ever done this? They said, Dan, you know, most people come into work at 8 o'clock in the morning. And Dave goes, uh-huh. And what am I really saying? Get to work at 8 o'clock, Dan. Dan, you're late constantly, Dan. Yeah, but I was indirect, right? So just remember when you're doing discipline and when you're conducting it and writing it, be very specific and very direct because it's so easy for people to misinterpret what you're saying. Last time you said something, how did you say it? When did you say it? When you write your documents and you're saying it to person, always remember you have to explain how can they do it better. I tell supervisors, think of it this way. If you're going to tell a person they have to change, what do they stop doing and start doing? And what do they stop saying or start saying? So it's behaviors, actions, and words. You know, that's real almost all the time. It's a behavior, action, or word. So always think your discipline is what do you want them to start doing or stop doing. Time frame, we'll talk about that too and talk a bit later about the 7 C's of discipline, but always give people a time frame to make changes. If you're going to say this has to change, they need to know by when. What's your next deadline date? When are you going to meet again to talk about this? Okay, so here are the 7 C's of discipline. These are, I think, in your handout. And the C's are just meant to help you understand all the different action steps here. Clarify the problem. That means be specific, be direct. Don't dance around the issue. Compare your performance to expectations. So write down for yourself what it was you wish the person would have done or should have done, and then compare that to what they actually did do, because they're going to need that comparison. It's surprising when you discipline people, oftentimes you need to say, you were rude to a person, and they would say, what does rude mean? You have to be prepared to say, well, you told them to go away. And the person would say, why is that a problem? I wanted them to go away. So you have to say, well, most people would say, I have another appointment, or they find a reason to end the meeting. They don't just tell them to go away. So you're going to have to be specific with people as to how you want them to behave. Mandate change. So when you're doing discipline, you're having this meeting, after you get done saying, here's what I expected to happen, here's what actually happened, I need you to change. I need this to start, I need this to stop. That needs to be in the document. Describe the consequences. Tell people, if this continues, it's going to be a problem in your employment. Or if this continues, you'll be on a suspension. Or if this continues, you might get fired. Whatever your disciplinary process is, but be sure to tell them what the consequences are. Get a confirmation from understanding. You don't want people to leave the room until you get a sense that they can look you in the eyes and you can ask them questions and say, is this clear to you about what we're talking about today? And one of the techniques to do is called rephrasing, having people say it back to you. Okay, so I think I heard you say you want me to start doing this and stop doing that, and I need to do so by this date, otherwise this is going to happen. Good, thanks, you understood. So get people to give you confirmation that they understand. So often in disciplinary situations, people walk out of a room and all they can remember is, I'm in trouble. Or, that crappy boss, I can't believe they're that mean to me. They just don't remember the specifics because there's so much emotion in the room. So get them to rephrase it back to you. Set a calendar date to review. If you tell somebody to change something, and if you don't initiate a time to go back and visit with them, I can almost guarantee you it's not going to change. Almost guarantee you. The largest majority of people that I've worked with and supervisors that I've helped, if we don't go back and talk about it again, the behavior drifts back to its normal mode of operation, the default way that people typically work in a work environment. And when I say close with acknowledgement, the best way to close a disciplinary meeting is to say to a person, Don, I know you can do this. I know you have it in you. I know this has been a hard conversation, and I appreciate your paying attention and listening to me well. I feel like we have an understanding of what we're talking about today because you rephrased it to me. I don't think we'll end up having to talk about this anymore. I'm really optimistic. Show that optimism, that you have trust, confidence, faith that the person can change. Okay, so documentation. After every conversation you have with a person, write some notes down. I've often had supervisors say, verbal warning, written warning, what's the difference? Good question. A verbal warning is just a conversation. It's the first time you've ever talked to somebody. It's probably very short, probably 5 or 10 minutes. You probably didn't prepare a lot in advance except maybe a few bullet notes on a piece of paper for yourself to remember what to say. And after you leave that meeting, nothing goes into their formal file. Nothing goes into HR, nothing goes into the corporate office. It just goes into your desk drawer, and you've got some kind of a file system for all of your staff members in your drawer. By the way, you should always have file folders for every one of your staff members in your desk or where your personal workspace is, because these things happen at a moment's notice, and you've got to find a place to write it down and stuff it in your file. So that's a verbal. Written warning is much more formal. It's usually on some kind of a form authorized by the organization. It's signed by both parties typically. Nope, employees don't always necessarily have to sign. Sometimes they refuse to sign, and that's okay. You just have initial it and say your employee refused to sign. It's an attorney question, but that's what I would tell people. So written warning is much more formal, and that goes to the HR file. That's going to go to somebody else. Somebody's going to file it, see it, talk about it in administration. And typically a written warning means if this doesn't change by the next time we talk, this might be the end of your employment. Let's talk just a bit about suspensions. Not on my slide, but I should have talked about it. Anybody here do suspensions? Just a raise of hands. Yeah, a few, okay. So here's my thought on suspensions. Suspensions is we're having this disciplinary conversation, and what I'm saying to you at this end of the meeting is I want you to go away from here. Be gone. Take some time. Think about this. This is a serious problem. And when you come back, and we'll talk about this in a bit, I want you to have a plan on how to improve. Here's my thought on suspensions. Do them with pay and not without pay. And so often suspensions are, go home, you're off the clock, I'm not going to pay you for sitting at home. You know, you're the one in trouble here, not me, so you hurt, not me. And the psychology would tell you that, okay, so now this person's leaving your building, they're going home, they know they're gone for 2 or 3 days, they know they're going to be short in their paycheck, and they're already frustrated, mad, worried, concerned, whatever the emotion is, and now they have to go and explain to their spouse why their next paycheck is 2 or 3 days short of pay, right? So now what did you do? You added on another layer of complexity and tension that you didn't need to add on. And because that's just going to worry them more, they're going to have, and now the spouse might be angry and frustrated, and now it's going to be harder for that employee to come back and change anything. Okay, so if you give a warning, give the employee a copy, make sure they have copies for their file. Even if they say, I don't want one, give it to them anyway. And have the employee initial or sign. Performance improvement plans. These are a structure by which you've had the disciplinary meeting and you feel like you have an understanding between the two of you what's going on, and you are now saying to the employee, I need you to come up with a suggestion about what you are going to do different, what you will start saying differently or doing differently to make this change, to have a positive improvement in your performance so that we don't have to talk again. And what I'd like you to do is to go home, or perhaps on work time, but somewhere in a private space, not out in the public. I'd like you to spend some time, and I mean like 30 minutes to an hour. I'd like you to spend some time thinking about and writing down what your plan is. And when we come back, next time we meet, I want to talk about your plan. I want to see it in a draft form. We might change it and might make edits to it, but the burden is on you to bring it back to me. This plan, all these plans need to have some goals. You'll probably have heard of SMART goals, but they need to be very specific and measurable. And they have to be something that it's a behavior change you're looking for or improvement that the person can actually reach and you can actually keep track of and is understandable. Before this improvement plan is finalized, I would recommend that you show it to one other person. If you have like a boss for you or a president or an owner, someone else who can look at it and so they can say, you know, I don't understand what this means or what is it that's supposed to be accomplished here. And also in the plan, have dates, have target dates by which you want things to be met by. And again, set up a review meeting after you implement the plan so you can talk about how the plan's going. So often we do discipline, and a couple weeks later, we're thinking about this situation, we're thinking about the person going, wow, that worked, they changed, I'm kind of liking this. And that's all we do. We just think about it. And what we don't do is walk down the hall, go visit the employee and say, you know what, you put that plan together and you're doing exactly what you said you're doing. I'm amazed and I'm impressed, and I wanted to say thank you for doing that. It's just wonderful. So do feedback for people, both good and bad, based off the plan. So all this discipline stuff, we have these influencers. We have things happening outside of the workplace. The reality is, years ago, when I was coming up through graduate school and my first job, the thought was, don't know anything about what's going on in people's workplace. That's none of your business. That's their business, and that's, that's like an invasion of privacy. Just the opposite. Now, the theory is you want to know what's going on in people's lives because often their life situation having some influence on their ability to perform in the workplace or to make changes in the workplace based on what your needs are. So find out, ask people. They just say, is there anything happening in your personal life that we can be of assistance with? Anything that we can give guidance to? Anything that would help make this easier for you to make this change in your performance? If people don't want to tell you, you can't drag it out of them, but you should at least ask. Sometimes you'll find out, here's a situation. I was in the bank in Milwaukee years ago, and we had an employee had been through several series of disciplines, and in that organization, when it was time to fire somebody, it wasn't the boss, it was the HR department called them in and said, you're fired. So here I am, I'm 26 years old, I'm firing a person who's about 52 or 53 years old, had looked at all of her past discipline, we're having a meeting, she has her union rep next to her, and at about 3/4 of the way through the meeting, she said, I have cancer. She says, that's why I haven't been at work. I have cancer. And I would say, if we had known this along, we wouldn't have been doing discipline for attendance. We would have been talking about accommodations and things of that nature. So be prepared for anything. You can have lots of situations come up, even if you just ask. When you ask people about influence from work, license them to tell them. Recognize that in life, people have stuff going on. Talk about some of your own life struggles you've had and that caused problems for you at work. Sometimes when you license people, psychologically, they have easier time telling you. Offer help, employee assistance programs, counseling services. There's a number of things you can offer to people who are struggling, but be sure to make an offer of some way that you can help people. But above all, even if people have outside influences in their life, they're causing work problems, still keep stressing. You have to get better. It still has to change. We can't just let this go. What role does your style have in their performance? Have you ever asked yourself this question? Have you ever thought of, if somebody videotaped me in the office for a week, what would I look like? What would people see me doing? If it was on YouTube, and what would people be commenting on my behavior? How do you show your emotions? How do you represent yourself to people? Do you keep them in check, or do you lose control once in a while? How often do you communicate your performance? Is it pretty infrequent or pretty frequent? How much you get people involved in the day-to-day decisions of the department or the company. Have you ever asked people, how am I doing? I'm your boss. How am I doing? Right? Has anybody here ever asked, how am I doing as a supervisor? Yeah, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. Okay. So, as an example, one of my previous jobs at Royal Credit Union, 85 supervisors, 585 employees, and every year, 2 months before the supervisor performance review, they asked their staff, and they said, how am I doing? They had them fill out a form with questions and comments, and guess what? It was not anonymous. It was not confidential. People put their names on the forms. Oh my goodness, they had to identify themselves. And so they put their names on the forms, and then the supervisor manager looked at all the comments and looked at the scores and talked about developing a plan for change for the supervisor to modify their leadership behaviors. And then there was a required meeting where all the employees sat down in a room in that department with that supervisor and with that manager, and the manager moderated the meeting. Supervisor said nothing. And the manager talked about all the scores and comments, and when we set up that system, we thought they would last 10 minutes, that nobody wanted to say a thing in that meeting. The average length of a meeting was an hour and 15. Hour and 15 minutes of people talking about, people saying, that comment, that score, I put that down there, and here's why I said that. Here's the behaviors I've seen out of the supervisor that I wish were different. So if you build that culture, that system works, but you have to ask. You have to get people to ask for their feedback on how you're doing. And also in this discipline thing, there's this counseling thing. If you haven't realized this already, you have to be a counselor to people. You have to have the skill set to be able to have conversations with people in ways that get them to talk and feel comfortable and share. So when you have 2 or more people in conflict with one another, just to sit by and let it go on, you'll have lower productivity, you'll have lower morale, have all kinds of problems in the workplace. So remember, you have to take action, and you have to get the people eventually to talk to one another. If you just said, Jill and Bob, go in that room right there and talk it out and let me know how it comes out, it's going to be trouble. It's just going to be like a little battle inside the room. You're lucky if you can get them into the room. So you have to start by meeting with them each initially as an individual and try to find out what their issues are about the other person. Try to get them to say them out loud and give them the courage and the confidence and lead them down the path to a meeting where eventually they can say it face-to-face with that person, and that other person can say it face-to-face to them, and give them the ground rules about how you conduct yourself in a meeting like that when somebody's telling you, please start doing this or please stop doing this because it bothers me, and how you respond to that, because your response in conflict is just say, thank you for telling me. It isn't I disagree or you're wrong or you're crazy, it's thank you for telling me. So you have to get into a counseling role to resolve conflict, and that will help you immensely in all this documentation and discipline, because you'll resolve conflict through your coaching sessions, or counseling sessions rather. Okay. So that was kind of a quick overview, and as Tim said, I have another engagement, so I cannot stay, so I apologize for that, but I'd be happy to take any questions you have about situations that you've been in, discipline you've had to do for people, anything of that nature. Yes? Yeah, that's a good question. Public sector would not be my realm. Oh yeah, yeah, thank you. The question was, in a town situation where you have a town chairman and a town board, and are you saying that performance issues are with a town chairman? You're wondering who would address the performance issues? Yeah, the real good question in any kind of a governmental sector is when you have, unlike in the private sector where you have maybe one person with job performance issues and a direct boss who's going to deal with those, in a public sector you have to have a board of directors or someone who is the managing person of that individual. Most nonprofit associations I've worked with, they have boards. For example, an executive director of a nonprofit who's really struggling with job performance. Now the board has to deal with that, and the board might be 10, 12, 15 people. What they'll do is they'll name an executive committee of the board, usually 2 or 3 people, 3 more common to have an odd number, and it's the executive committee who is the direct boss of that one individual. And the executive committee will just simply keep the rest of the board posted and informed about all the meetings they're having, all the discipline that they're doing, any of those conversations. Did that answer your question? They take it out of the big picture and have just a small group of people work on the issue. That's what I've seen. Did I answer your question? Okay. Anything else I can help people with? So just one last raise of hands. Oh yeah, sorry.
If we're not going to do performance reviews, we're going to hear from Pete next, who I think will tell us document, as
Right.
an employment lawyer.
Yeah.
What are we supposed to do?
That's a great question, because that's why performance reviews still exist. It's documentation. So if performance reviews go away and we're doing constant coaching, constant sit-down, stand-up meetings, constant feedback for people, if those get documented, and if you keep notes about all those short little conversations you have with people, and you've got 12 months worth of notes, including any that are disciplinary in nature, you've got lots and lots and lots of documentation. But where some companies fail is they say, you know what, we're not going to do reviews, we're going to do these stand-up meetings, and I'm going to have a 30-minute coaching session with all my staff once a month, and they don't write a thing down. Then we got a problem. Yep. Yeah.
In that situation,
You would. You do want to keep, thank you. The question is, don't you want to keep documentation of positive episodes? Absolutely. Yeah, we always think about protecting ourselves against lawsuits, but you're right. If you're having conversations with people about how well things are going, write that stuff down too. And here's why. So often people leave organizations, and then they go to the next organization, and that organization says, so what documentation do you have from your past job that shows what great of a job you did? And they go, I don't have any documentation. They just kept telling me I did a good job. If you write notes about good performance, you can give people copies of that. Not that you're encouraging them to leave, but people change, let's face it, people change jobs. Nobody stays around for 35, 40 years anymore in a career. So if you give people copies of that documentation, you're actually doing them a positive thing. Not only that, but then when it comes to time for pay raises, any kind of pay adjustments or bonuses, you've got some documentation about how well things are going. And last raise of hands, how many people have ever had to fire somebody here in the room? Oh my, almost everybody. Okay, so you know exactly what we're talking about. All right, thanks very much.